Hey, Miguel Iturrate and Devin Miller here for the Cage Rage Podcast, and we're going to do our wrap-up of UFC 235. It's about 24 hours after the fight. A lot of things are settled, and we're going to go long on this podcast and break down the whole card. Devin, how you doing?
I'm doing good, man. There's a lot to cover from last night, man. This was definitely a show that we learned a lot from, I think, about certain fighters.
Definitely a lot of different paths going in different directions for different fighters. A couple of unexpected results, a couple of expected results. Let's start with the main event. Obviously, Jon Jones and Anthony Smith. That fight went down the full 5 rounds. Jones, maybe didn't look as much of a Terminator as he has before, but he pretty much, dominated the whole fight. Wound up with a little bit of a bruised eye and stuff. Anthony Smith, I think you earned respect all week. Earned respect in the ring. The interchange around the illegal knee, Jones, I saw somebody ask Anthony Smith, is Jones a dirty fighter? And Smith was always, politically correct about it. But that knee was kind of, it was a 2-point knee because Anthony Smith wanted to continue. There was the potential he was disqualified. And Smith saying, he doesn't want to win the belt that way. That, he was winning points on everything except for, for actual offense against Jon Jones. So Smith comes out likable, gives a real coherent interview, but in the ring, man, Jones is still above everybody else. What do you do with Jones next, Devin?
Well, that's the big question because, and I always get, if anybody checked out my coverage after the fight, I do get kind of a different, somber attitude after a Jones fight because this man's career is so clouded by all of his scandals, and it's frustrating because if it were not for that, we would undeniably be watching greatness. And his fight IQ is brilliant. He attacks every part of the body just consistently. He's fluid with everything he does. And, on the previous show, I mentioned that I feared that this could turn into kind of like the Derek Lewis DC thing where as soon as the fight gets going, we start realizing oh, yeah, we knew what kind of matchup this was going to be. And this was even more so because I think we all kind of were hoping Smith could pull some off some historic upset because Smith's a good guy and it would have been an awesome comeback story. He started his career 5-6. I mean, after 11 fights, he had a losing record, and here he is fighting arguably the best fighter to ever step in a cage for the world title later on in his career. So it was a good comeback story. He wasn't able to get the job done. But from here with Jones, I personally, when I look at the light heavyweight roster, they do have some good contenders coming up. Johnny Walker, Dominic Reyes, 2 young, hungry contenders who have won every fight they've been in the UFC. But Thiago Santos is probably the most deserving of a fight. I don't really want to see that much. I want to see either a third DC fight at heavyweight or Francis Ngannou is what I want to see with Jones if I had my choice. I don't know if that's what they're going to do next, but Jon Jones has got to get in there with somebody that actually can threaten him with something. Because if it's just going to be a back and forth chess match, technically he's going to beat everybody. And,
I think we saw that Smith, game plan, the whole thing, just couldn't get off in the ring, and he talked about it, that just, he let Jon Jones be Jon Jones, and he didn't understand what happened, and Jon Jones seems to have done that to just about everybody. I agree with you. I think the most intriguing thing for him is a move to the heavyweight division. I wouldn't rush him in with the top heavyweights just yet. I might go a different route here in the heavyweight division. If it was up to me, I think that the right thing to do is that you take Cormier and you pay Cormier maybe more money than any of the other heavyweights right now, and you have him rematch Stipe Miocic after all Miocic has been on the shelf and kind of waiting, and he is a former champion with a lot of, decoration, a decorated former champion who deserves a rematch. So that rematch there, and then you take Jon Jones and put him in with Brock Lesnar. That way you kind of got the big fight that they wanted there. The X factor here too is Lesnar is we've been sitting around waiting, and where is Lesnar? What's the news with him? I don't know on the pro wrestling side. But I think that would be the best way to get Jon Jones into the heavyweight division fast and then set him up to see where he goes from there. I think you're right. I think what they're going to do is we're going to get the rest of this year him cleaning out the light heavyweight division, kind of reminding everybody he's the champion and stuff. And then just the consistency of work should put together put to rest some of the baggage.
I actually one of the most intriguing things I've heard Chad say on the podcast that really got me thinking after the whole move from Las Vegas over to Anaheim, or not Anaheim, over to Los Angeles for the Gus Jones fight, where he was saying that he thinks that they're going to end up stealing that Brock Lesnar fight from DC and giving it to Jones, and that this is all, because we get into some conspiracy theories, that this is all basically a pretext to use the same arguments for past steroid use to cover for Brock Lesnar to get him in there. And I thought that was really interesting, and it could be true because they're going to have to do something because he's a career juicer. Everybody knows it. Brock Lesnar, that is who I'm talking about. But if they ended up giving that fight to Jones over DC, which I do agree with both of you that it would be a bigger fight, but it's just such a slap in the face to DC at this point, man, because that was the fight. I mean, they've already had the whole altercation inside the octagon with Lesnar coming in there and pushing DC, and, that's the fight that DC's basically been hanging on to before he retires, that he wants to get that Lesnar fight. He's a big pro wrestling fan. So it would be a gigantic slap in the face to DC, but I don't disagree with you that would be the best route that they could take, because Jones, he can fight Thiago Santos. I think we're still a good year away from somebody like Johnny Walker coming up and being challenging for the belt. He still has other things to do and prove. I do think that could be a fight in the future if Johnny Walker keeps wrecking people. It'll be a young, hungry, popular phenom contender that's wrecking people going against the champion. That could sell. But right now, nobody's going to be interested in just a basic Thiago Santos, Corey Anderson, these type of fights against Jones, because it's getting to the point where nobody thinks he's going to lose. And so going up to heavyweight is probably the best route for intriguing matchups.
Not to beat a dead horse, but I do think there's one path maybe to selling that fight to DC, and then it's like I said at the very beginning, is first you dump money on him like the champion. Make him make more money than all the other four in question and treat him like a real champion. I think that'll speak a lot to it. The bottom line is what's good for the sport. Let the circus be the circus. Let Jon Jones fight Brock Lesnar in a 3-round fight, and let the champion defend his belt against a worthy #1 contender. I think you could sell that to a competitor like DC. But we'll see. It'll probably be some kind of circus. Let's go ahead and go to the welterweight fight, because now this one here, I think this fight was under the radar the whole time because there's exciting fights bookending it. And I think a lot of people were like, Woodley's going to win, and then we're going to get Woodley and Covington. And, it was a foregone conclusion, except to Usman and Usman's camp. The odds were kind of close. Usman left no question.
Yeah, I'll be honest, going into this fight, I knew it could be a close fight. I knew Usman's a very good fighter. But I thought Woodley would win, and the main reason I believed that because Usman hasn't shown too much with his striking. He does have a knockout on his record, but I figured this was actually going to be a pretty lackluster fight. I figured it would be a lot of clinching. I thought Woodley was going to be able to keep the fight up on the ground. I didn't expect Usman to be able to just really dominate the wrestling the way he did, and the pace. And I also thought that Woodley would do better at being able to get off and keeping Usman off of him. And I couldn't have been more wrong. I mean, Usman really just went in there and bullied Woodley. And I shared on my minute video that I thought a tweet that I saw was perfect, where Woodley talked about how it felt like a bad dream as he's fighting the Nigerian Nightmare. I thought that was very interesting in the post-fight interview. But the biggest criticism I had with Woodley for years, back before he became champion, that was my biggest criticism, is like his losses, he struggles going backwards. And he doesn't fight well going backwards. And I thought that he kind of had gotten better with that, and with his, kind of playing against the cage style. And that's how he caught Darren Till. He did a really good job of stifling everything Damian Maia. He let Damian Maia press the pace, but shut him down completely and just picked his shots from there. It didn't work against Usman. And it looks like we got Covington. Covington did a good job of having smack on both sides, getting his name out there through this weekend. He was there heckling Usman at Usman's media day workout. He was there in the crowd with his MAGA hat and his interim belt on. And we talked last time about on the last pay-per-view about Kelvin Gastelum doing something similar. And that's smart on these fighters to keep their name relevant even when they're not fighting, when they're in the title hunt. And so it looks like we're going to have Covington and Usman next. What do you think about that, Miguel?
Well, I mean, the bottom line is they announced it almost before the close of the show. They were starting to come over the net late after the show that Usman and Covington was going to be the next fight. Now, this is where I talk about where you can take the circus and you can put the circus in there, and that's cool, and the UFC's always done that, right? So that's why Jon Jones and Brock Lesnar should be acceptable. Because the bottom line is before the start of the fight, they were talking about Woodley and St. Pierre, the greatest of all time. What, this guy doesn't get a rematch? He asked for it. You know what I mean? It's just what the sport would do is you give it, if a rematch is worthy, you give the rematch, but here they'll pursue the money in the half fight. We'll get a better fight out of it. I don't know that Woodley fought in such a way. You can almost argue Woodley fought himself out of his rematch. And I worry a little bit about him in terms of he's a guy who sometimes has been inactive, not only because of injuries and because of everyday things, but also because of sometimes bumping heads with Dana and things like that. And you combine that with a team like American Top Team and then Rufus Sport, because Dean Thomas was in his corner along with Duke. That's two teams where, does this guy take days off? Is he overtrained and then ring rusty? Is there a combination of things where you just that all tightened him up? I don't know what happened. He didn't know what happened. So, but that could be one explanation, because overtraining is something, look at his physique and everything like that. He really looks like somebody who looked prepared to fight. If anything, too, another argument might be he might be a little muscle-bound for this sport. I'd like guys maybe to be a little looser at this point, especially now that he's aging. Now, when you get older, sometimes if you're losing limber, ability to move and flexibility for muscle, maybe you wind up with a lactose dump in your muscles or whatever, and you can't get off. So I thought it was an interesting thing, and I think Woodley goes back to the pack. It's not what he wants to hear, but it's already been decided. Usman and Covington were fighting in the hotels, this afternoon. So we're going to get that fight, and I think, more power to Usman. I think Usman is a guy who deserves a spot in history. He's the first African to win a UFC title. I think that should be big news, and I think, something to keep an eye on and things is the bottom line is Nigeria is a major, population center with 150 million people there. And at some point, if there was a place that you wanted to take on, that would be crazy, but at some point, if you become a big star and you can pull your whole country in to see it, I think you'll get the UFC's attention if there's 150 million Nigerians rooting for Usman.
Yeah, I think that this could definitely be the pathway into bringing the UFC to Africa, which I think would be great. I think that'd be really cool. Something to consider. That the UFC had all their issues with Woodley for numerous reasons, but one of the main reasons that kind of got shut down after the Darren Till fight was that he did have some lackluster performances. He didn't finish Damian Maia, and his second Wonder Boy fight was kind of wasn't the most exciting fight. But now it's not like they just solved that problem at all, because Kamaru Usman, and this is one issue that I think people are going to start having with him, is he's 10-0 in the UFC, and he's a very impressive fighter, but 9 of those wins have been by decision. And when to do like a hardcore critique of his fight against Woodley, he dominated the wrestling, he dominated the pace, he pressed forward, Woodley could do nothing to stop it. But when he got it on the mat, he didn't really do a very good job of passing guard. He didn't really let his hands fly. The one time he did kind of let loose in the 4th round, he ended up just tying up, pushing him against the cage and grinding on him. And Colby Covington's also not really a known finisher. There's also an argument to be made for that Ben Askren would be somebody that would not be dominated like that in the wrestling category. But Ben Askren's not known to be a big finisher. So they've got all these personalities, but it's like almost back to the GSP days where this division, other than the period with Robbie Lawler as the champion, has been pretty much defined by champions who win decision fights. And I think that they're going to have that with a lot with Usman.
Well, we'll see how long Usman hangs on to the title. It could be in a situation where he loses it to Covington, and Covington loses it to somebody, and we're in a rotation of, a bunch of guys that are all even. It's just who gets to the top and to the peak at the right time in that situation. So we'll see, but exciting times coming along. And part of the reason for that is what happened in the third fight, which is Ben Askren's debut against Robbie Lawler. And, a controversial fight that never hurt anybody. Askren, really being a dick afterwards, in my book, saying, is that the best you got? That doesn't hurt anybody. I think he did the right thing. Love him or hate him, people want to see him again. Lawler, what can you say about Lawler? I mean, if you needed to go on a time machine and fight Germans in a ditch in World War I might take Robbie Lawler with me. You know what I mean? Because, god damn, that guy is just a warrior. And you can what I like, too, is the mindset, He gave Herb Dean hell for about 15 seconds, and then he was just professional enough to say, I've been through it all before, shake his hand and move on and fight the other day. He went home without a scratch.
Yeah, when you consider all of Robbie Lawler's career and anybody who's known Robbie Lawler for years, the slam that he hit Askren on when Askren hit an arm drag, tried to take his back, and Lawler lifted him up and slammed him and then just proceeded to punish him. That was like the most Robbie Lawler thing ever. That was like a definition of Robbie Lawler's, and it was such a cool highlight. I was impressed by Askren, though, that he stayed composed through that, took the punishment, got back up, and he seemed to go right back to his game plan. And I'm not as critical as some are of Askren for this performance because right before the whole controversial ending, which it was strange for him to even go for the bulldog choke and all that. We'll get to that. But after all that, after taking a hellacious slam and getting his face pounded in, he got right back on the game plan and started backing Robbie up. He started, really pawing at his strikes, clinching up with him, grinding him against the cage. And it started to look like Robbie was starting to just feel smothered. And he ended up getting that takedown. Robbie started popping up, and then he goes for the bulldog choke. And we were screaming, arguing with each other about whether he was out, whether he wasn't out, what they should have done. And looking at the camera, looking at the review, it's hard. I don't think he was out, but I can understand where Herb Dean got the justification to stop the fight because Lawler's hand did seem to just go completely limp. And he didn't really he didn't make it too well known that I'm fighting this. I'm not out of it. Don't stop the fight. And it's a ref's job to protect the fighter and all that. So that was an interesting finish. I wish it wouldn't have ended that way because I would really have liked to seen how that fight would have turned out because I still think it would have been Askren pushing forward, trying to grind on Lawler, but Lawler having big moments. And would Askren have been able to handle it? Would Lawler have been able to handle the pressure? Would Lawler have ended up exerting his will on Askren? I'd actually like to see them run that fight back. I don't think Askren will do it, though.
Yeah, no, I think if you run it, you're never going to get that particular moment back, right? And we're always going to have those questions. I agree with you completely on many levels. First, Askren, he's a superhero, right? Because, and I think that plays into Robbie Lawler's reaction. I think that Herb Dean made a mistake, but he's the guy who's in there willing to go in there and make a mistake and put it on the line. So I do give him the respect that Robbie Lawler. If Robbie Lawler can respect him, then I got nothing to say bad about Herb Dean. He was trying to do his job. But to me, the thing is if I'm Robbie Lawler and I'm in that bulldog choke, he's and it's not a choke, he said. He said it was on the chin and he's absorbing pain and it hurt. He said it was hurting him, but he was going to ride it out. He said, I was thinking about picking him up again. And I think that would have been interesting because he might have picked him up again and given him a slam. What happened is he had his hand here and he sort of let it slide. So now with that slide of the hand, it winds up kind of limp looking. And now the ref's talking to him, What if I don't want my opponent to know I'm coherent? I don't want him. Shut up, ref, man. I'm fighting here. You know what I mean? So you don't know exactly. You can't put yourself in Bobby's shoes. Now, thumbs up didn't work out, or he said he was a little late with it, or however it all worked out. Whatever it is, that circumstance, you can't recreate that, so we'll never know. But what you saw, Ben Askren, I'll give you this. There was a moment, first of all, I think Bobby Lawler, too, sitting there in that bulldog choke, he's got to be thinking, this guy's still here. You know, it's got to be a little annoying, you know what I mean? Because, you know, that was weathering a storm. That showed me a lot. I like that. And so now Askren's up. He's in the bulldog choke. I don't know what those interactions are in a fight. And I think the referee kind of imposed his will, maybe his doubt, and I'm okay with it. He was trying to save the day. But, man, we were robbed of something special there, I think. And, you know, we'll see. I think at one point when Askren got up, though, I don't know if it was because he was still a little on Queer Street or something, but there was something about the way he was moving forward where he was looking a little plodding and he was looking a little older. And he is 34, and he's a guy with a lot of miles. So I question, you know, when he starts running into now guys that are going to be younger than him and hungry here, if he's going to be able to impose his will as easily. So it's going to be interesting to see, but I think we got him at the right time. Hey, he just beat Robbie Lawler.
Yeah, and Askren is, just from experience, it's hard enough just fighting a guy with a really good wrestling background in mixed martial arts, but when you're fighting a guy like Askren who just doesn't care about being a well-rounded mixed martial arts, he's a 100% just specialist at the game, at what he does. Those type of wrestlers, man, all they do is just they're gonna attempt to weather whatever you throw at them and just keep grinding into you. And that's an exhausting fight. And that's why I was pulling for Robbie in this fight, and I thought, hey, I mean, it's pretty clear when you look at Askren, he's got kind of a dad bod. He's clearly not doesn't have much snap in his strikes. They're just not, that part of his game's just not there. He's just a pure wrestler, but what he does so well. I mean, he's just going to keep just coming at you, grinding forward. And that's the biggest robbery of all in this whole thing, in my opinion, is that we didn't see that fight play out like it should have. I feel like, because I'm really interested to see if he would have been able to keep that up for 3 rounds against Robbie Lawler without getting cracked, because he already got hurt quickly. And is he going to be able to play that just grinding style on Robbie Lawler for 3 rounds and just wear Robbie out? It would have been interesting. So, like I said, I hope they run that back. I don't think they will, though.
Yeah, no, Robbie Lawler's on record saying he would do it. Ben Askren, not so much. Ben Askren called out the winner, Darren Till, and Jorge Masvidal actually on Twitter, I believe, said that he's already bought his plane ticket to London. I think that's smart of him, but if I'm the UFC, you got to stop letting Mr. Askren make too many of the calls. You can't let him do that. So what I'd like to see is let him test his grappling out against Damian Maia.
That would be an interesting fight. That would be a very interesting fight, especially at this point of Maia's career. Maia's in his early 40s, and he's on his way out, and that could be a big win. That could be a big final win for Damian Maia. And Askren, I mean, is he going to want to play that kind of a game? And Maia's striking's come a long way over the years, a lot more than Askren's has, and so that really is a very interesting idea of a fight.
I think it's two guys that rely on groundwork that comes from a completely different branch of the tree, so to speak, and it makes for an interesting matchup. Let them both do their thing, because they both want a ground fight, right? So, but and again, Askren's calling out people who want to be ranked number 3 and stuff like that. It's like, Ben, you know, fall back to the pack a little bit. He's always going to give you his opinion. I'm cool with that. But at the end of the day, I would make him do something completely different. Let's move on. We had Weili Zhang and Tecia Torres. I was impressed by Weili Zhang because I thought that she was tentative in the weigh-ins and that she maybe seemed caught up in the moment and stuff. And I guess I was wrong. I do think, culturally we're looking at, her potentially being, the first big Chinese fighter to come out of there. That you're looking at her, like Usman, being somebody who could be a gatekeeper to a big cut, to a big market.
Well, yeah, she comes in. She beats the number 7 ranked woman. This is only her third fight in the UFC. She's 3-0. She's got an overall 19-1 MMA record, and that one was her first pro fight. So she's won 19 straight fights. She's only 29 years old. She seemed, I mean, for her to go in there and she really just outclassed Tisha in every aspect of the game. And Tisha's been somebody who's been a staple in the top 10 of that division for a long time. She's a good prospect, really good prospect of this division, but 115, the women's strawweight is really such a good division. I mean, you obviously got the next title fight between Namajunas and Jessica Andrade, which is still listed as the co-main event for 237. They were supposed to have Nunes and Holly Holm as the main event, and I've theorized that and there has been rumors about possibly Aldo fighting on this card, and Ortega's being mentioned, and that could be a main event, especially with Holly moving up. I think Namajunas and Andrade could headline that fight, and I'd still buy it because it's a great fight. But you got Tatiana Suarez, you got Michelle Watterson, you still got Claudia and Joanna if she goes back down. It's such a good division, and she's just a really good addition to it. And with her winning this fight, and you've got girls like Carolina and Claudia and some of these women that have kind of tasted title contention and fallen off, and so they're not really going to get pushed at this point because they've been there, done that, they failed. This girl hasn't, so I think it's very possible she gets like a top 5 contender. I'd like to see her at this point maybe against like a Claudia Gadelha, maybe Michelle Watterson if she'd take it, and I definitely think they're going to push her as like one of the newer contenders to groom. It's just she's a foreigner, and that comes with problems sometimes, but in promoting in America. But it works for the Brazilians. I mean, they've had plenty of champions that don't speak English, and Weili Zhang is definitely a pretty exciting fighter, and I was happy with that fight. So I'd like to see her pushed.
Keep in mind, the UFC's been to Beijing before. Didn't they do headline with Kung Lee there? If I'm not mistaken, they've gone back on a couple of occasions. The market there is going to be there, and it's a market that could be the number 1 economy in the world in the next 10 years, so to speak. So, companies like the UFC, they think that look for them to give Weili Zhang every chance to succeed. Let's go ahead and move down into the opening match of the pay-per-view. You had Cody Garbrandt, the former champion there in the bantamweights, taking on Pedro Munoz. Garbrandt really needed a win. He was 0-2 heading into the fights, 0-2 against TJ Dillashaw, so really no shame in that. But also kind of needed to get back on the slide. Munoz sort of still under the radar a little bit. I don't think so anymore.
No, not at all. And I got to give credit where credit's due. When me and you talked about concerns for Cody, I was bringing up Team Alpha Male, and I still do have kind of concerns about his environment. And I think he does need to make a change after this. But you mentioned, like you said, they got him to the world title fight and he became champion. I'm more worried about his emotions, and that's what cost him again. This is 3 fights in a row. It's silly. He's got all the talent in the world. He's got the skills. He's got the explosiveness. He's got the speed. He's got the power. But it's like if he gets hurt or he hurts somebody, he stops moving. He stops picking his shots. He just goes for the kill, and he just commits to, we're going to slug this out, and one of us is going down. And 3 times in a row now, it's been him. And it's costing him fights playing that kind of a reckless strategy. And I think that he's far from done. He's only 27 years old, and he can definitely regroup and correct what needs to be corrected, because what's costing him is just irrational exuberance in these moments when he gets somebody hurt. And I think that he needs to definitely start thinking about it like fight IQ, and having a mentor there that can kind of really criticize him and not just be yes man, because he basically is Team Alpha Male at this point. And he needs some new faces, I think, around him in his environment that are going to sharpen him a little bit better and get him right mentally for these fights. Because talent-wise, it's there, but and then as for Pedro Munoz, I got to give credit to my buddy Dave because he got it. He showed up to watch the fights as they're like getting ready to fight. Sits down. I ask him what's going to happen. He's like, "Oh, Pedro Munoz is going to win this fight," and none of us agreed with him. Turned out he was right. So.
Yeah. Hey, my hat's off to Dave. My hat's off to Pedro Munoz. Definitely an impressive performance. I agree with what you said about Cody. You know, I don't want to take the shine off of Pedro and just put it on Cody too much, but Cody is the former champion. Now he's looking at 3 losses in a row. And the bottom line is this, is Cody, when you get hit, you go down. That's something that you just have to accept as reality. I'm not putting you down, but you have to make game plans and adjustments. A good guy who made those adjustments to look at it a little bit is someone like an Andrei Arlovski. Andrei Arlovski didn't become a ground fighter. He became a very polished stand-up fighter for what the UFC is, and became somebody who was able to protect himself. Now, he's still gone down every once in a while because he does have the chin issue. But he did learn to fight with it, and you have to do the same thing. Learn and have a strategy there. And you're right, if you're stale with where you are and you're not getting that, then you may need to look elsewhere. Now, let's get to the prelims, which would be the headline of the ESPN card, which had your prospect of the week, and at least, in terms of a W, Zabit scored the W on Jeremy Stephens. I think Zabit, showed a couple of, I don't think he's a top 3 to 5 fighter yet in this weight class. I think he does have that type of top side. But, Jeremy, I don't know if he got the best Jeremy Smith. I don't know, maybe it was a matchup problem. How'd you see this fight?
Well, it was a big win for Zabit to come in at number 13 and beat Jeremy Stephens, the number 6 contender. So this is going to propel him into the top 10. And this division is very wide open. This is probably the one division right now that when you look at the whole landscape of the rankings, it's hard to really foretell what it's going to be like even in just a year. Mainly because Max Holloway is a champion and he's fighting for an interim belt next month at 155. And it's been inevitable that he's going to end up moving up. Then you got Jose Aldo, who's talking about he doesn't want to fight past 2019. You got another young contender, Brian Ortega, who's there, just lost to Holloway, but he's probably going to be around for a while. Frankie Edgar's in his later 30s on the latter half of his career. And then you got some guys that are kind of falling down the rankings and going out like Jeremy Stephens and Cub Swanson. And you got other younger guys who are not super well known but becoming well known who are contenders. And there's a handful of young contenders. You got Ortega, you got Volkanovski, you got Zabit, you got Yair Rodriguez, you got Mirsad Bektic, you got some good guys in this division. And Zabit is one of those guys that's vying for who could possibly be the next face of this division. And so the bar is being shot high for Zabit, I really believe, and I've shot the bar high for him. I thought he fought really well, but I do have some concerns with him. Number one, the way he was backing himself up against the cage on numerous times, and he was almost letting Jeremy get back into the fight. Jeremy was starting to find his range and landed some shots, and Zabit would, get back out of range. And somebody like a Max Holloway or an Alexander Volkanovski, who I think, out of all the top prospects in this division that are coming up, I think Volkanovski would wreck Zabit right now because of the pressure, which is something Jeremy failed to do, was just really, really put the pressure on. But those guys would have been really backing Zabit up bad with his movement and his ring awareness in this fight, I think. And somebody like Max Holloway would have been eating his body alive. I think the best thing Zabit's got going for him, he's got creative striking, but he doesn't have too much power, which is another thing that kind of bothers me. But he does have that Russian, just gritty, freakish grappling, and I think that's the best thing he has going for him. But other than the second round, that wasn't really a big factor in this fight. Like you said, I'm not so sure after that fight if he is a top 5 contender in this division. I thought that he would go out and look even better against Stevens than what he did. I think fights with Yair Rodriguez, Mirsad Bektek, or Volkanovski, or Ortega for that matter. Because I don't think Almeida. Yeah, I don't think that, or even Renato Moicano. I don't think somebody like Ortega. I don't think that's a guy he'd want to take down. And does he have the power Ortega does? I don't think so. So, and Volkanovski is just a freaking Terminator. So, and Yair Rodriguez probably has better striking than he does. So, there's some other contenders that I kind of look at like matching up against Zabit after what I watched last night that I'm like, I'm not so sure that Zabit would win those fights. So, I'm not so sure this was as big of a win as what I was thinking it would be for Zabit over Jeremy Stevens, even though it was a big win, got him in the top 10.
God bless Jeremy Stevens, because Stevens is a guy that, when he's one of those guys that, like he said, I think it was him that said it. If it wasn't him that said it in the pre-fight, somebody said it, and it rings true for some guys. He's one of those guys. He just likes fighting. He enjoys that part of it, right? So, now, with that respect, you've got the right opponent to do whatever it is that you want to do. So, that's the showcase Zabit had in mind. He's not there yet. We're going to have to wait to see him to get there. I do think one of the things that you pointed out that he's not getting enough use out of is with a body type like he has, long and tall like that, and not a lot of power in the strikes that you initially see, he really needs to get pointy and start using more elbows, more knees, and that sort of stuff, like we've seen with like a Jon Jones. Now, of course, hey, just become Jon Jones is something anybody can say and very few people can do. But I think with the type of work ethic the guy has shown, that you pointed out culturally that he's going to come with, that he's a guy who could grow and adapt. So we'll see. He needs a haircut.
Yeah, we were in.
You can't be allowed to fight with that helmet on.
It's funny because I hate that comedy's been so when it comes to the PC culture, comedy. So you got to be careful about anything you say. But we were sitting there watching that. And we're like, man, I don't know if he looks more like Abraham Lincoln or Bin Laden, man. Like it's got like he's got kind of like he's funny. He's
right. He's got a like Lincoln.
Yeah, I was gonna say we kept saying we're like, man, if this dude becomes world champion, people are gonna wonder why he's on the $5 bill because he looks a lot like Abraham Lincoln. But it's funny. But yeah, he's. I saw one tweet where that said Zabit is the oldest looking 27-year-old I've ever seen.
That too. The Russians have that sometimes. So.
Yeah. But he is a great. All criticism aside, he's a great fighter. He's got very diverse striking. Like I said, his grappling's great. I love watching the man fight. I'm shooting big when I think of Zabit. I'm thinking like this guy could be a champion. And when I'm thinking of
that coming 3 to 5 years down the line, if you really bring a guy along, especially in a deep division like this, you know what I mean? You may be right 3 years down the line. He may lose a title shot and still win it if you let a 26, 27-year-old guy really develop and have a 10, 12-year career. So I think we saw good things, but I'm not ready to put him there yet. Now, let's go ahead and move on to Johnny Walker. Here's a guy that people are going to want to rush. And, he took out Misha Cirkunov. It took about 38 seconds to do it. Misha, to me, is a guy that needed to get this fight to the ground immediately, and he wasn't able to do that. Looked a little tentative, and he let the other guy get off. The only X factor here, and I saw it mentioned, one of the guys that's online who's a lawyer type pointed out that Johnny Walker's injury did not happen during the fight. And that may be something that the insurance people are going to look at. And, probably with a guy that they're looking at here, the UFC isn't going to want a separated shoulder, I guess is what he had. Something like that, to really be a problem. But you could, again, with the UFC sometimes being stiff-armed, handling their foreigners and their people here, here's a guy they want to start. They should make sure he doesn't get hit with a bill because of, some stupid insurance form. You know what I mean? And then that would be the only real X factor here as to when we're going to see Johnny Walker again. When his shoulder gets better, but if the insurance isn't paying for it, are we going to get him back? Is that really the only factor? Misha did nothing to him. Hurt his knee.
No, and we kind of had that suspicion. It was a cool highlight, and I'll just establish this first off. Johnny Walker is really exactly what the UFC needs in these bigger divisions right now. They're so thin divisions, and he's got the personality, he's got the name, he's got the fighting style, he's putting together highlights, he's young, he's wrecking people. I mean, it's great for the organization. But as somebody who's really trying to criticize and critically analyze these fights, it was once again we really didn't see much. We really don't know. We need to see more. We need to see him against somebody that's going to be able to test him. But when I look at this division, you can bet they're going to fast track him because we already talked about Jon Jones earlier and moving to heavyweight and stuff, and that's mainly because Gustafsson was probably the biggest challenge he had. He's already beat him twice. That fight's not happening anytime soon. He just completely, just looked outclassed Anthony Smith the whole time. Thiago Santos, I think a lot of people I think he'd be just about as big of an underdog as Anthony Smith was, even though he's pulled together some exciting knockouts. So that might get people on board for a fight like that. But, who else is there? Corey Anderson, Volkan Oezdemir, Jan Blachowicz. Dominic Reyes is another young up-and-comer, but he's not getting near as much attention as Johnny Walker is. But Latifi and Manawa and Glover, all of them, those are middle-of-the-road guys in this division. They're not going to beat Jon Jones. They're not going to fight Jon Jones. So Johnny Walker is definitely, if there's anybody at light heavyweight that could be the big prospect that could end up getting the title fight, it would be him. But we just don't know much about him. And as for the injury, I think that, the UFC's got an investment with Johnny Walker. They're going to want him back in there. And Johnny Walker's come a long way very fast. I remember him on Helwani's show talking about just a little over a year ago, he fought a fight in Brazil and didn't even get paid for it. And they lied to him about the pay and didn't pay him. And, he made more money in his first UFC fight than he's ever made in his life. So he's come from some severe conditions, and he's fun to watch. I just would like to see more of him. I want to see some adversity with this guy. But right now he just looks like a wrecking ball, and it's going to be really good for highlight reels, and it's going to be really good to sell any of his fights going forward.
Yeah, someone like a Jimmy Manua or someone, I would keep him away from Brazilian versus Brazilian matchups, but maybe even someone more dog like Glover, like a Glover Teixeira type, even though we don't have a non-Brazilian Glover Teixeira, right? But someone like that, I'd like to see exactly what you did. I'd like to see him, if he's going to keep winning, let him keep winning. I'm good with that. I'd like to see him win the second round because the first round was tough. You know what I mean? I'd like to see him have to work through some more things because, what we're seeing up to now is he's about as unscathed except for the damage. Him and Robbie Lawler could fight today. You know what I mean? Nobody got hurt in those fights. Let's move on to a fight where certainly I think the superhero factor for my friend Diego Sanchez is high here. I think we're in a situation where, with all due respect to Mickey Gall, because I know, he's made the dedication to be a pro. He got an opportunity that nobody would turn down, and of course he didn't, and more power to him and stuff. But I did start to see a little bit of arrogance here. A little bit of arrogance. And the bottom line is they kept saying he has 6 fights, he's 5-1 or whatever it is. You know what I mean? It's like, no. Take the CM Punk fight and throw that out. That's not a fight. So he has even less fights and less stuff. Then before that, there was the fight against the guy who went 15 minutes with CM Punk. You can start discounting those as UFC level fights as well, right? They're not really. He's into that opportunity world where I'm all for it, but don't let that fool you. You are getting opportunities. Those don't really count. Not to fight a guy like Diego Sanchez, who's done what he's done. He's been doing that for 15 years, and I mentioned it in the pre-fight thing. He's as wacky and as pumped up for this and stuff. As the day I met him, which was pre-UFC and stuff, and you kind of wonder, is he going to age? Is he going to mature and stuff like that? But that's who he is. And hey, that was an ass kick, and that was a clinic, and I'm glad it went that way.
Yeah, I'll let people behind the curtain at the CRP because I'll just throw this out on here on air. I do want to do a history show on the two ideas that I have the most with you and Chad would be, UFC 60 with Hughes and Gracie, which we've already talked about, and Forrest Griffin and Stephen Bonner. And why I bring that up is because when that fight happened, and Dana White still calls it the most significant fight in UFC history, that fight happened on April 9th of 2005 for the finale show of The Ultimate Fighter. That was the same night that Diego Sanchez won the first Ultimate Fighter season. Him and Forrest Griffin both won the first Ultimate Fighter season when he won the Ultimate Fighter in his technical UFC debut against Kenny Florian. So almost 14 years later, you still have Diego Sanchez there. And when he won the Ultimate Fighter alongside Forrest Griffin, that really marked a whole new era of the UFC. That's when the UFC took off. The UFC got into reality TV with the Ultimate Fighter at the exact right time when Survivor and The Amazing Race and all these different reality shows were so popular. I mean, the reality TV phenomenon was at its all-time high, and they come out with the Ultimate Fighter on Spike TV. It was like the man's reality TV show, and people loved it. People ate it up. They had all these different personalities in the show, and that's when we first got introduced to Diego Sanchez, and that's when I was becoming an MMA hardcore fan, was during that time. And so Diego Sanchez is one of the few guys that's still fighting that I have literally followed their entire career. Mm-hmm. And he's like one of the only guys left that I look back at that time that was a real, I mean, he was a big contender. I mean, he was a popular personality. I remember his fights back in the day with like Nick Diaz and Carl Parisian, and those were great fights, man. And Diego was truly a nightmare, and he was just gritty and you never got tired. And he's fought at 85, 70, 55, 45, and Diego Sanchez, in my opinion, he's now 18-11 in the UFC, almost 30 UFC fights. For what he's done for the franchise as a whole, in his involvement in the explosion of the sport of mixed martial arts in the UFC brand, I think he's a Hall of Fame. And I hope that he gets that credit, because Diego has been a company man. He's been reliable. He's a gentleman. He's always been fun to watch. His fight with Gilbert Melendez should be in the Hall of Fame alone. The ass whooping he took from BJ Penn was just incredible. But so I've got a lot of great memories of Diego Sanchez, and it's cool to see him getting on a win streak at this point in his career. I hope he can, pull off a couple more. I don't anticipate him being a top contender or anything like that. But it's cool to see him pulling off some wins this late in his career.
It would almost be interesting. Khabib is such a dominant champion, you don't expect it, but could he somehow get himself maybe as a late replacement into a title fight like a la Bisping and go out on top? It's a pipe dream. I don't think it'll happen. But yeah, I'm just taking a minute to go through his career. He's beat a lot of guys that went, from the early days, like David Beekleton. David Beekleton made his start on a show I did in Europe. Luigi Fioravanti too. He was a Northeast guy. Came through American Top Team as well. So right there, he was fighting guys that we knew real well. So I knew Diego was tough when he was going in. Jake Ellenberger I've known for a long time, so Ellenberger beat him. He's got tough guys all over his resume. At the end, though, he's become a bit of a young guy killer. Mickey Gall this last week, he also sort of put the nail in the coffin of Marcin Held. Marcin Held, kind of a bit of a Polish leg lock phenom from Bellator that, the UFC kind of stamped out and didn't give much of a chance to. When you put him in with a guy like Diego, Marcin was a sharp kid, but, that experience and that grit is really made the difference.
Yeah, and I like that idea that they played with him and Cerrone about bringing these younger guys in, and they're trying to almost like it's like they want to make a name off of these old veterans with these younger guys, which that's nothing new, but it's been coming back to bite them, because now Cerrone and Sanchez's stock is rising real fast again, and It's cool to see these old vets, saying no, you ain't coming in and making a name off of me. And that's what I've been seeing with Sanchez. It's like a new motivation. Like, no, I've got the experience, I've got the skill. I'm not dead yet.
And so that's the wrap on UFC 235. A lot of people call it like a strange UFC. I agree with that, with the Askren fight kind of being a dissatisfying ending. That's the only thing I can think about. It's just a dissatisfying ending. Good for Ben. Lawler showing a lot of class. You can always, talk about it and stuff like that, but at the end, you're a little bit dissatisfied. It's a point in time you'll never create that moment again, so it's just lost. And that's, the feeling for it. And then with Smith and Jones kind of going the way it the way everybody expected, a little bit of, surprise with Usman and Woodley. That I don't know if Usman's gotten enough credit for it yet. I think he'll get more credit here as the Covington fight gets built up. But I think overall a good UFC, not super great, maybe bordering on great. What do you think?
I was pretty entertained the whole card. Like I said, I think we found a lot out in this fight, in this card. A lot of divisions shook up. We've got some newer contenders. We found out a little bit. We've seen what Askren's going to look like inside the cage. I think the Usman thing was one of the biggest things for me because Usman, and now the conversation with me is like, just how good is he? Because who's going to beat him? Like, who's got what it takes to stop what he does? And if he's able to pull off that kind of a style against Covington and maybe Askren and all this, I think that he fits well with his frame and all this up at 85. And, I think we've really kind of slept on just how good Kamaru Usman is. And that was one thing that I felt like I learned. And then, the Cody Garbrandt thing, that was a big, hard loss for Garbrandt and a huge win for Pedro Munoz. And Zabit performed well, but he's, I don't know, I got more doubt of him being featherweight champion after that fight than I do before that fight. So, and then with Johnny Walker, we already covered, like, it is what it is. I mean, it was like almost like a replay of his last fight, so we don't really know yet. But I was happy with the card. It was a lot better than what we saw in Australia. I mean, just a lot more interesting card from top to bottom for sure.
Hey guys, this is Chad here. How y'all doing?
How's it going, Chad?
Hey, pretty well. I've been really enjoying the whole thing. I'm off camera, just listening to it and learning as I go. I've got one question for you that I'm not exactly sure how to put this, but it goes something like this. So you have in with the new and out with the old is sort of the UFC's motto right now, right? The problem is they can't get rid of the old because the old keeps looking too good to get rid of, and the new doesn't look good enough to replace the old, right? So that seems like that wraps up what the show overall has been about, and really what the last 3 pay-per-views have been about. Before you guys wrap up, and maybe if you want to do this on a long-term show on another day this week, we can do this. That's fine too. But if you've got something to say about that, I would be curious to hear what the two of you have to say about that before we go out. I missed part of this, so I'm not sure how much you've got to interject on that or not. But I'm just wondering, in with the new, out with the old, that doesn't seem to really be working for the UFC at all. And I know that you had both spoken about that. But where are we really at with that? Because every time they think they're going to retire somebody, they wind up not being able to do it. And so the UFC has this pocket full of surprises where they go, we can't get rid of this guy because he's too good. If we send him to Bellator, because they're going to go somewhere, right? I mean, if they've still got gunfire, they're going to go somewhere to shoot. And so the UFC can't get rid of them necessarily, but they can't keep them. And so they've got this massive arsenal that they don't know what to do with. Do the two of you feel like that is a really good problem to have, or do you feel like that's going to wind up being the albatross around their necks that looks like a good luck charm and winds up being the thing that pulls the ship under? Because let's face it, dragging that kind of weight around is expensive. And keeping that many fighters on a roster is expensive. And that was the idea of cutting all of that in the first place and getting rid of it. And it's backfiring and backfiring and backfiring. What do they do? What's the solution to this? I'll let you go on that. I just wanted to know that. If you feel like answering it, great. If not, wrap it up and we'll hit it on another one. Thanks, guys. It's been fun.
Go ahead, Miguel.
Okay, that's a lot, Chad. What I wanted to point out, what you made me think of, and I think that this is something that not a lot of podcasts have covered or look at it, but there's some, and I know nothing from inside the UFC. I have no contacts or anything like that, so I'm not claiming any great inside knowledge or anything like that. But I think Dana is a guy who they're going to be wondering. He's got a new boss now. I've seen pictures of the Fertittas at this last UFC, and they look pretty loosey-goosey with their $1 billion and, pretty happy with their shiny shirts and stuff. And most of all, they look stress-free. Dana didn't look stress-free anymore to me. You know what I mean? And when he used to hang out with the Fertittas, he was stress-free, and they were firmly following his plan. Now, his plan made everybody a fortune, so it's hard to argue against Dana White's plan. But now Dana seems to be invoking the same plan, which is, hey, so he's got new bosses. He's like, we'll bring Brock Lesnar back, and we'll get a million pay-per-view again. And then all of a sudden, it's like, it's been months. Brock Lesnar's been cleared to fight since the beginning of the year. We still haven't seen him. There's no plan, no nothing. So is it that easy to just bring back Brock Lesnar? Well, we got Jon Jones. Well, we got George St. Pierre. Well, it's all a moving target. And you're right. I think this tendency to recycle things, even including Anderson Silva and things like that, is something that I don't know if that's as impressive to the new bosses as it would have been to the Fertittas. Those guys grew up with the Fertittas. Therefore, there's going to be some type of relationship, especially with the Fertittas being, at the end of the day, fight people. I think they got a buzz off being with the fighters and stuff too. I see this new company as being much, much more business-like and professional, and that's why I ask questions like with the insurance company and Johnny Walker and things like that. So I'm not saying Dana's on thin ice or anything, but at the end of the day they're going to be asked to create a new star. I want to see them create a new star if I'm the new boss, because I know I'm tired of seeing Brock Lesnar 40. It's like, once upon a time there was a fighter from Indiana named Mark Birch. He's a big guy, a heavyweight out of the Indiana team that gave you Keith Wisniewski and what's the name of the wrestler kid who's still at 145?
Eddie Wineland.
No, Wineland is smaller. The up a weight class. He's a workhorse, and I forget his name, but it's not important. It's an established camp. But Mark Birch was signed for a fight, showed up, and because he was 40, was denied because the medical procedures require additional exams for older fighters. So Brock Lesnar has to have that. Anderson Silva has to have that. How many fighters are you going to have on your roster, Dana, that you can go to your boss and say, hey, look, another geriatric fighter. Where's the new star? I think that's something that's still pending, and I think Dana has that pressure right now because some of the recycling hasn't worked exactly the way they wanted to. Hasn't exactly been, I think, Dana gets points too because he would never do Tito and Chuck 3. That's just a hideous idea. He'd never do it. The word is that got 30,000 pay-per-views. So Dana's, a genius in terms of the operating with the rosters of the last 15 years. No one's made more money. You can't argue with him. But can he make a new star? We've been waiting for a long time for a new star, since Ronda.
Yeah, and I do see where Chad's coming from, because not only did we already mention Sanchez and him knocking off young contenders, and Cerrone, they clearly tried with Mike Perry and with Alexander Hernandez, and he shut that down. It's making his star bigger than it's probably ever been. But we also kind of seen it with Aldo. Jeremy Stevens definitely wasn't some young guy, but he would have been a potential contender for Holloway had he beat Aldo. But he shut that down, and then Moicano was definitely a young contender who would have probably got a title fight with beating Aldo, and he knocked him off. So then you get in these positions where you've got these established guys that are in in contendership and in up top of the ranks who are knocking off all the top contenders, and what do you do with them? But they're not the champion. But they've lost to the champion. You got like Frankie Edgar and Jose Aldo. These are established guys in their division that are probably not going to be champion again. Maybe, I don't know, with Holloway moving up, Aldo might. But you want to move guys along, but then you got these older vets who are there playing gatekeeper, but they're beating these younger guys. Do you just stop putting them up against these guys so they don't get beat? Or do you, and as Miguel was talking about, which groom a new star, or do you just throw them in there? If they win, they become a star. If they lose, we're the old dogs having one last run. They market it however they want. But I do think the UFC is doing a very good job of handling both. They're letting guys coast their careers out under their brand well, and they're developing new talent well. And I think we're going to continue to see that.
I think you can't say they do a good job or bad job. Not to contradict you, because I agree with everything that you've been saying, but I think what it is if you have a roster of 600, you have 600 different cases. It's a case-by-case basis depending on the fighter, where they are in their career, how much money they've been making, what they've been giving you for the money, right? Because if you get flat fights, but they're at the top of the pay scale, somebody's going to say, hey, wait a minute, you know what I mean? Meanwhile, if you're giving fights like Robbie Lawler, that pay scale is managed, so he's at the top of it maybe, but it's still managed. Only Conor is broken through the roof, right? Or whatever that is. So, like I said, I think the key here is the managing of the stars. So if you have a champion who shut down, or a former champion, or a gatekeeper who shut down a couple of guys, you got to give them a title shot. You got to give them you got to move them up. You can't keep holding people off to the side. Tony Ferguson, Frankie Edgar, how far back do you want to go? Dana has a really bad track record of honoring title fights and putting true number one contenders in title fights. The whole Brock Lesnar reign after, minimal run in the UFC, not even started the trend, but is the biggest example of that trend where guys getting title shots without really earning the title shots, except for maybe with name recognition. That's a factor, But if it's name recognition, it's like, well, he's famous. It's like, then we're not far away from Wesley Snipes fighting. Devin and me are getting together here 24 hours after the UFC 235 to, sit and talk a good conversation about the fights and all the threads that are leading out of the UFC, which, as Devin pointed out a couple of times, there was a ton of news that comes out after this, including, you got Usman Covington, and you got a couple of other fights that are coming up, potentially Askren calling people out, and da-da-da-da-da-da. So we spent an hour at least on this podcast, and I had a lot of fun doing it, and, we'll do it again next UFC.
Yeah, and I want to say something real quick, because I sometimes feel like we don't plug enough for the podcast, and I just want to say for anybody that does watch this through that, man, we're pumping out content on a daily basis. I'm becoming more and more just absolutely sold that we're doing something different, man. We're really everything from odds to combat sport history to breaking down these fights. I mean, we put out so much content leading out from UFC 235, and then I stopped and reflecting on it. I was like, man, that was only in a 5 or 6 day period worth of time that we just put out content after content after content. And, then we covered fight by fight, and I'm starting to see, the views coming in and all this. So if anybody does watch this, if anybody is finding us, hit the like button, leave a comment, tune back in, check out some of our content, because there's a lot of it, and we're producing a lot of it week by week, day by day. So tune in.